on the concept of the family. Let me get the right one here. Good. Grab the wrong ones. Here we go. So today we're going to take a look at over the next month, who is your family? And this portion kind of has a special meaning for me because when I talk about who is my family, even as a pastor when I was young and just starting ministry, I lived apart from my family. So, and you think about the important holidays that families gathered together, it was Christmas and Easter, right? And so being a pastor, sometimes I wasn't able to be with my family, my extended family on those holidays. And so early on in our ministry, Patty and I recognized that there was a need for us to understand family broader than just our nuclear family, and even more comprehensively than just an extended family, although those are important. But before I jump into that, maybe I should talk about the family that I grew up in. So I'm kind of an oddity. I grew up in a small town in northwest Iowa, and my parents made the intentional decision of living nearby my grandparents. So we lived 70 miles from my grandma and grandpa on my mom's side, and 80 miles from my grandma and grandpa on my dad's side. My grandparents lived 10 miles apart. So basically they were in the same region, the same community. My grandparents lived in town in Sheldon, Iowa, and my grandparents lived outside of Sheldon, a little farm in a bunch of farming communities. And so because of that, I grew up with an extended family. So I had one aunt and uncle that lived cross country. When I was very young, they lived out in New York. Then they moved to Colorado, and that was fun because we made a couple of trips out to Colorado to visit them and got to see the mountains and play in the mountains. I remember going to Santa Village outside of Colorado Springs. They lived in Colorado Springs. My uncle was the director of Goodwill Industries there, and my aunt was a church musician. Then they moved to outside of Toledo, Ohio, and that was when I was in high school, so I got to go there a couple times. And but most of the time, they came back to my grandparents. So I grew up Christmas and Easter being with extended family. So that's why it was odd for me as a pastor. Now I couldn't be with them. So I was always with my cousin Gordy, who's my age, and Gordy's the one who lives in Ukraine, farmland in Ukraine right now. So he's still over there. And I had a nice message from him just a few weeks ago. But so we hung out together, and his sister, my brother, who's a year younger than me, my grandma and grandpa out on the farm, playing in the barns, riding the tractors with my grandpa. In the summer, they would spend 2-3 weeks, and we'd be out at the farm that whole time with them. So I have these really special memories. My extended cousins would also be a part of that. I had an aunt and uncle who lived 30 miles from us. He was a teacher and then a life insurance salesman. They had, I think, 9 kids. So we we had lots of fun, lots of family time together. It was a multi-generational experience. If there was a problem, Grandpa was glad to have the extra hands on hand. So like when the cattle would break the fence and roam down the road, he had help to gather the cattle back up. Or when the sheep broke through the fence. Or I remember when the shearer would come and shear the sheep, or when the sheep were being sent to the slaughter, then, I remember the ramp and the truck that would come to load them up. And so if we were there, we were asked to help. In the summertime, baling hay, so we'd be on the hay wagon, riding behind the hay baler and stacking the bales of hay. And so we worked together, we played together. There was a lot of joy, a lot of love. One of the memories, my grandmother was the best root beer float maker in the world. So we usually got those at night. When I was really young, I remember floating in bed after having a root beer float. But she didn't care. She didn't mind. Different generations offering a lot of wisdom, patience, questioning. I remember when I was when I got accepted into graduate school to work on my doctorate of ministry, my uncle, who had actually gone through seminary himself, he spent the afternoon questioning me about all my Lutheran, because I was going to go to this Presbyterian seminary for graduate school. So he wanted to make sure I was still Lutheran. So he questioned me on all my Lutheran theology. Thankfully, I think I passed his test. But that was just kind of the extended family. Was always together, working together, playing together. And so I don't think that I was that unusual. I think a lot of people have had those kinds of experiences growing up. Maybe not so much today, but if you're my age, I think many people can relate to that. But today it's different. And one of the things that this segment has drawn me to is to take a deeper look at the biblical vision of family. Because when I think of family today, as I look out in the congregation, mostly what I see is like mom and dad, 2 kids, a dog, and a cat, the nuclear family. Sometimes we have, like the 2 of us, multi-generational families that are somewhat involved in different ways through the church and the school. We also have a modern understanding of family, but it hasn't always been that way. In biblical times, and even currently in many cultures around the world, family means something different than that nuclear family. Family means grandparents and aunts and uncles and parents and brothers and sisters and cousins and close friends, business partners, all sharing life together, working together in a multi-room house around an open courtyard. That was the biblical vision of family. In the Hebrew language, they refer to it as bet, B-E-T, and or it gets translated B-E-T-H, Beth. So if you remember the town that Jesus was born in, Bethlehem, that's the family town. The household would be the literal translation. And lechem is bread, so it's the household of bread. So Bethlehem started out as a household that their family business was baking bread and selling it. And so we have these understandings, these biblical understandings of family that's a little different than our modern understanding of family. In the Bible, the Greek word that they use is oikos. And, they don't really translate it as family. It gets translated as either as house or household. And the reason for that is because it's a larger, more comprehensive understanding of how the family functions. They knew that if their household was larger and stronger, lots of kids and grandkids and cousins, that was more likely to be fruitful and prosperous. And so, like on my grandpa's farm, when all the cousins were there and they needed help, we were all put to work. I remember when it would be harvest time and I'd be there, and they had people who worked for them for years. And in that era, the main meal was right after noon. So you'd be out working early morning sunrise, you'd get out there and work in the harvest, and then you'd take a break around 1 o'clock, and my grandmother had this huge feast prepared. And, lots of meat and potatoes, and it was like what we would eat at night, they ate at noon. And then they'd take a little rest, and then they'd be back out in the fields until sunset. And that was inclusive of the hired hands. These are the same gentlemen that worked for my grandfather for years, and they sat around the table with us. There was no distinction. So that was all just, they were a part of the family farm. So the biblical bet, or oikos, contained multiple generations, multi-generational, and they were built around a common business, which could be successful. So, like the house of Jesse, they were shepherds. They owned sheep. Bethlehem, the house of bread, the place where they bake bread. And so you have all of these different identities, a family household that include not only the people and the generations, but also the work that they did. For instance, the family business of Simon and Andrew in Capernaum was fishing. That's Simon Peter. And they likely shared the same extended family home, one where multiple generations lived and worked together in the common business. So some of the family and the friends that worked for them, some would work repairing nets. Some made weights and floats for the nets, for the fishing. Some cleaned the fish and dried them on the rooftops. Some of them sold the fish in the marketplace, and others went out in the boats to catch the fish. And so you had all these different jobs. You have children running around and all this activity going on, and that was the household. In the biblical era, oikos existed for two primary reasons. One was provision, to provide for your family, and the second was protection, to protect your family. And so in the modern world, we developed various systems and structures that have led to the assumption that we really don't need an oikos or a bet, a household. So in the post-industrial revolution, corporations replaced family businesses, taking parents out of their homes to fulfill their vocation. And as people moved from farm and village into rapidly growing cities, police forces and fire departments developed to maintain order and to protect citizens from harm. We now pay for things like health insurance and auto insurance and homeowners insurance and life insurance, disability insurance, we have so much insurance, and Social Security for retirement to protect ourselves from the inevitable challenges that life continues to throw at us. And all of this leads us to assume that we can thrive with just a nuclear family, or even just as individuals. Yet, over 50% of our marriages in this country end up in divorce. And we have a record number of single parents struggling to raise healthy kids in even less than a nuclear family. This points out the strain that many struggle with. Now, that is not to say that our modern structures are to blame, but that we need more help. They are not enough to replace the strength and the health of the extended family. Perhaps we need to rediscover a new kind of family that has been lost to this modern world. What did Jesus' family look like? When we read the Bible, we read it with a Western, more individualistic worldview. And if you're like me, you've probably read the Bible and didn't realize until you studied it in more detail that Jesus was baptized by his cousin. John the Baptist was actually Jesus' cousin. Or maybe that when Jesus preached in his hometown of Nazareth, that all of his household was probably sitting in the synagogue when he preached that first sermon to them. Meaning his mother and his brothers, and if he had any sisters, and his cousins and his aunts and his uncles, and the people who worked in their family business. Jesus came from a carpentry, building family. And so all of his family would have been sitting in the synagogue listening to him. Jesus, his father Joseph, and his brothers were builders or contractors. They worked primarily in stone. Nazareth is filled with limestone. All the buildings are stone. And so I think we often think of, when we talk about Jesus and Joseph being carpenters, we often think of woodworking. And they would have known how to do the woodworking. But most of the construction in Nazareth was done with stone, with limestone. So they would have known how to cut stone, how to carry it, how to look for it in the quarries, how to set the blocks of limestone. They would have been strong, hefty men to be able to do that. Yet when Jesus preached in his hometown and his family rejected him and his teaching. Well, they were okay with it when he said that God had sent him to fulfill the mission of the Messiah. But then he went on to talk about how that included the Gentiles, and they didn't really care to hear about that. And so, if you remember that story, they chase him out of town. They're on the edge of town. They're ready to throw him over a cliff, but he escapes. Well, where did he escape to? Well, the Gospels tell us that he went from Nazareth to Capernaum. Because, as John said, he came to his own people, and his own did not even receive him. So that leads us then to a new kind of family. And a new kind of family isn't something completely different from what we've known, but it's something that's more complementary to what we have known and what we have learned about. So from Nazareth, Jesus went to Capernaum. This was a prosperous city on the northern edge of the Sea of Galilee. It's a fishing town, and there he connected with Simon and Andrew, with Philip, Nathanael, and then an unnamed disciple that we presume is probably John. And these guys were not only fishermen, but they were also people of peace to Jesus. If you remember when I, a couple weeks ago, talked about people of peace, how we are to look for people of peace. The reason we do that is because we learn the idea, the concept from Jesus. That's how Jesus developed his disciples. And so, because these guys were people of peace to Jesus, he invested in them. And after teaching in the synagogue, and after healing a possessed man in the synagogue, Luke tells us that Jesus went with Simon and Andrew to their extended family home, their oikos in Capernaum. Now, on one of my trips to Capernaum, I actually got to see the house of Simon Peter. Archaeologists have identified this house, and what we can tell is that it was comprised of 8 rooms that were built around an open courtyard, surrounded by a secure wall. In one corner of the courtyard was a clay oven. That's where they did their cooking. And the other corner of the courtyard was a stairwell that led upstairs because you didn't want to waste any space. So they would use the roof for washing, drying clothes, drying fish. If they're needing extra space for people to sleep, they'd put beds up on the roof. And so this was the kind of house that Simon and his family lived in. So when Jesus entered this oikos of Simon's, he discovered Simon's mother-in-law was sick, and so he healed her. Then she got up and she made a meal, and so Jesus shared in the meal that she cooked for him. After healing and teaching and preaching, Jesus opened the doors of Simon and Andrew's house, turning it from a fortress into a place of hospitality. The reason he did that was because he was wanting to teach us a new way of being family. Not that the extended family wasn't good, but that it could be even better. And the way that we learn about this is Jesus' biological family comes to visit him in Capernaum. And they're looking for him to bring him back to their oikos in Nazareth because they've heard that he's gone out of his mind. That's what the scriptures tell us. So they come to bring him back to their oikos in Nazareth. The crowd says to Jesus, "Your mother and your brothers are outside seeking you," because all these crowds have followed him now to Simon's house. "Your mother and your brothers are outside and they're looking for you." And Jesus answered them, "Who are my mother and my brothers? Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother." So what Jesus is showing us here is a new and more comprehensive vision of family. So some things that we've learned from this teaching of family is that Jesus was not a lone individual extending God's kingdom by himself. He didn't come here to be like a Superman, to do it all himself. He employs us, his children, his followers, to work alongside of him. And Jesus did not call his disciples to abandon their families in order to follow him. I think sometimes we've had that misconception. Jesus asked his disciples to maintain the relationships with their families. When they go back to Capernaum, they go back to Simon and Andrew's house. They go back to the other disciples' homes. So the family is not eliminated. The family is enlarged. Jesus built a whole new kind of family and invited his followers to carry out his mission as part of that kind of family, that oikos. This new kind of family was not defined by blood or birth, but by a covenant relationship with God and the kingdom and the mission for this world. This new family did not exist primarily to defend and provide for its own members, but to seek and to save the lost. It was not a nuclear family, but an extended family. It was not only a biological family, but also a spiritual family. And it existed not for itself, but for others. It was a kingdom family. It was a family on mission. Now, one of the things that I am interested in hearing from you and from those who will watch us online is how would you envision your family? What's your family story? Because I think that helps to define kind of the foundation of what we can use to build a family on mission. One of the things that that we struggle with, I think, is how do we keep our kids and our grandkids connected, not just to family, but to our spiritual relationships as well. And I think I have a lot to learn in this area. But one of the things that I remember from my upbringing was that the spiritual aspect of that Kruse household on the farm was, it didn't happen in the church a whole lot. I mean, we went to church on Sundays, but it really happened in the household. So I remember my grandparents reading their Bibles early in the morning when we'd get up. They were doing their devotions. And as grandkids, we would see that. And I remember my grandmother talking to me individually and to us as grandchildren about her faith. And I remember when I was older, probably high school, maybe college, might have been college because I went to college in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So it was like about 2.5 hours from the town that I grew up in northwest Iowa. But halfway to Sioux Falls was my grandparents' farm. So when I would go to school or come home from school, I would often stop and visit them. And I remember one of the times my grandmother asking me, why doesn't the pastor talk more about heaven? You know, she was getting older at that point in her life, and that was something that she was wanting to hear more about. My grandmother was a teacher, my grandpa was a farmer, my grandmother had a college education, my grandfather had an 8th grade education, but they were very successful at farming. My grandfather doubled the size of land that he started with, and so that was pretty remarkable with an 8th grade education. The thing that really defined the family was their spiritual nature. And again, it wasn't so much look at how Christian I am. It was how they lived and how they acted. And I believe that was a profound impact on my life. And it was on so I have 3 brothers, an older brother who's 4 years older than me, a younger brother who's 1 year younger than me, and then we have my fun brother, the afterthought we call him. Mom and Dad had him when my oldest brother was 12 years old. I was 8, and Kevin was 7, and so he did not grow up with the same experiences that we had with that extended family. My grandparents died when I was in college, so Brent would have been maybe 10 or 12 when my grandparents died. So he didn't have the same kind of relationship with them. But I think that, I know that for my other brothers and my cousin, who's a devout, faithful Christian over in Ukraine right now, all of us grew up with that foundational experience from my grandparents. And so my question then is, how do you envision a family on mission, not just with your extended family, but then maybe looking for people of peace to complement your extended family? And what would be a mission? See, my grandparents had the mission. It was the farm, right? That was their purpose. That was, and we all worked together to help support my grandpa on the work in the farm. So what would be the mission, for the Allbeck family? What would be the mission for the Clark family, for the Burke family? What is the purpose? And then who are the people of peace that might be complementary to the people involved in the extended family? So my son has two really good friends that he grew up with, are probably his closest friends, Eric and Justin. Eric plays the bass here on occasion with the band, with the worship team. Justin has been now in recovery for 5, 6, 7 years, I think. He's now in charge of HR for a recovery organization here in the Valley. And he has a new girlfriend. They met at a gym. She was from Dallas, I think. And so she just moved here a few weeks ago. So they've come to church here a couple times. They were at church on Sunday. And, so I look at Eric and Bree, I look at Justin and Tessa as potential people of peace. So Eric and Bree were with their family on Easter, but Justin and Tessa didn't have any plans. They came to church, so we told them to come over and have dinner with us. So the mission then becomes the other question: what draws us together? What's the purpose for our family? Are those big questions, or those questions that you've thought about before?
I mean, the biological family is easy and a no-brainer. We're actually blessed that our 2 daughters live here and our grandkids live here.
I should let you use the microphone here, if you don't mind. That's over here.
Oh, sorry.
I knew it was somewhere.
Thanks. Hello? Yeah, so the biological part is easy for us, but we're also blessed that our daughters live here and our grandkids live here versus living out of state and you wouldn't get to see them all. So we're set up nicely for that.
Yeah.
As well. I'll let Debbie talk about her family, how she grew up. That was pretty close knit, similar to your cousins and stuff. I had the opposite. I think my father didn't get along with anybody, so we never saw any aunts and uncles or cousins, or we rarely saw them, I should say, as well too. So I feel that part's worked out in our family on our side. And then as far as going to church, I mean, this is all Debbie. She makes a big deal about the grandkids coming to church.
Yeah.
With us, and that part's there. Outside of that, I can't think of anybody top of mind, too. I mean, I have a golf buddy I go with. I don't know if, that makes sense at all.
Mm-hmm.
And, sometimes, I mean, the good news and the bad news about your family being here is when your family's here, you don't bother making as many friends and stuff as, and when we lived in, Dallas and Kansas City, and, away from family, kind of forced you to make more friends. So we'd actually, probably made more friends when we lived away from our family. But, so, I don't know.
if I can just respond to the golf, because I know you've done a fundraiser a couple times.
Yeah, one time, yeah.
And, that maybe that becomes a part of the family purpose, is that you figure out some mission to support. And
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, we did it for polycystic kidney disease, and I purposely pushed a lot of it on my son-in-law on purpose, because I did a lot of the fundraising for walks and other things for the same charity, but I wanted like the new group, or the new young people to do it, and he did a great job in a short period of time for two guys that didn't know what they were doing. For us, it actually went off well. But that's a good avenue. That's a good thought, too.
Well, and if I can, let me draw this. We use this square to kind of explain, and this was actually borrowed from, I don't know, one of the corporations used this concept, and some of the people in Sheffield worked for, 3M or some company. And so these are the 4 levels of discipleship. And so, what you're teaching your son-in-law is really discipleship. It may not be about Jesus, but it's about how you help them to understand their role in the oikos, in the household. And so D1 is where, okay, now you watch. I'm going to do it, but I want you to watch to see what I'm doing, so you can begin to learn it and pick it up. And then after they've watched you for a while, and it's like, okay, now I'm going to do it, but I want you to help me. And so D2 is where you bring somebody along, and then you actually have them do parts of it. And then D3 is where now you're going to entrust them to do it, and you're alongside. So when they forget something or they need some help with something, you're there to help coach them. And then D4 is where they're ready to do it on their own now. And so the golf, for example, would be, your one son-in-law has done it. I don't know if the other son-in-law plays golf or not, but maybe bring him in. Okay, now the two of us are going to kind of teach you what we did, and then then we're going to have you help us out. And now we want you to run. This year we want you to run it.
Right.
We're going to walk alongside of you.
Right. Yeah,
And so they're beginning to learn from Dad, what it means to be in relationship, to work. Like I said, what the mission is, what the purpose is, may not be as important as the people that you're teaching. And so one of the things that I learned that turned me upside down, changed me completely around missions, because I was always the missions guy, and I wanted to support Habitat for Humanity because they were building houses, and the people helped build their house, and it was awesome to see these people taking responsibility for their futures. And then what I learned when I was studying discipleship was you do the mission not for the mission. You do the mission to teach the people about Jesus. And so the point of the mission is to build the relationships. And then when they're asking questions like, why do you do this all the time? Why do you give this stuff away and your time away? And and then it's like, well, it's believe it or not, it's a deeply held view of what I'm supposed to do as a Christian. Well, why would you do that? Well, it's because what Jesus did for me. It's one of the ways that I can repay, give thanks for. So does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
So the focus is really on the people,
Yeah.
not on the mission. The mission becomes the tool.
And you get to play golf.
And you get to play golf. Exactly. Tell us about the family, Debbie.
Oh, my family? Yeah, my cousins were all within the same area. And we would get together at Christmas and play a lot and had a lot of good times. But there wasn't a lot about God in the family. But one thing we did know, we all did go to church, we all made our sacraments and stuff like that, and we did go to Catholic school.
Mm-hmm.
So I did have that, but then as far as finding people, I would say that Jeff's friends that died, his wife, I think we could maybe try to help her.
Mm-hmm.
She's Catholic, but she doesn't believe anymore. So that.
She converted to Judaism too. She was Catholic.
But I don't even think she believes though.
Yeah, that's a different story. But
Yeah.
They would celebrate Christmas and the Jewish holidays.
Your friend was Jewish?
Yeah, he was Jewish.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He was the one with ALS.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I did reach out. We went to lunch one time, and then I just got busy. So we keep saying we should call her, and I mean, it would be kind of hard to how do you approach her, I guess. But I think she would be a good candidate. It was really hard for her when she did lose her husband. She went through a lot.
Does she have family?
She does, and a great support system.
She's got a great support system.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
She has 2 sons and a daughter, and
Great family.
very, very tight.
That's good.
Yeah.
And, I think, it's hard when you lose a spouse because the couple relationships that you had are different now. I remember my mom talking about that after my dad died. She said, a lot of the couple friends don't call me anymore.
Right.
It's just awkward. So for you to continue to connect with her, I think, like with the lunch, is awesome. If there's a time when she's not with family, like on a holiday, invite her into your family. Those kinds of things,
Yeah.
I think can make a difference.
Yeah.
And your family experience probably has grounded you into your desire for your grandchildren to have that experience.
Yeah. Well, I think because for me, I feel like I didn't do enough for my kids with religion, and because we were where we were at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we went to church, but that was it.
Yeah.
So I didn't teach them anything further, and now I see my mistake. So now I try to do it with the grandkids and teach them more.
We all did that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a pastor, and I did that. Thankfully, my daughters have, growing up as PKs is either a real positive or a real negative.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was a positive for my daughters, but I don't think it was for my son. He was here on Easter Sunday, and he's a believer, but he's not. I think the institution, the church, took a lot from him of mom and dad when he was young. So I think there's maybe some resentment. And I didn't put my family first. I put the church first.
Okay.
And so I failed too. I think, in many respects we've, my generation, older, we did things that we were taught to do, that we were expected to do, but we didn't have the passion, the purpose
Right.
connected to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's a couple things, you know. And then I thought too, for the grandkids, maybe go through them to volunteer at places, start them,
Mhm.
you know, especially Charlotte, she's 7,
Yeah,
and start volunteering with her. And we were going to do the one thing, what was it? Yeah, feed the starving children, but then she had a competition, so I thought that would be a good route to go too with them,
yeah.
and try to get out there like that way.
And, Feed My Starving Children runs day and night,
Okay.
2-hour segments. So you can always go down as a family
Okay,
and
that would be good,
just
yeah.
do that sometime. Just sign up online and go down as a family. It doesn't have, we try to organize it, to make it fun for the church and school.
Oh, okay.
But, you can also do it on your own. You don't need to wait for the annual event.
And she's at that age where she's excited to do that kind of stuff, before you know it, they don't want to have anything to do with it.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that's a good idea too, if we can do that then.
Well, and I think that, you're planting the seeds. They're coming to Sunday school, they're coming to church,
Right.
if you go and serve together. That's where, it's not so much what happens here in an hour on Sunday morning
Right.
as all the relationships and the experiences that are part of that faith formation. There was, several years back, in the Lutheran Church, we had a kind of milestones ministry is what they called it. And that was, to mark different times and different, it was more liturgical. So, you mark the baptism, you mark the confirmation, you mark the all the special events that happen in the church, the first communion,
Right.
And so what discipleship does, I think, is kind of expands that. And so find opportunities that you can mark your faith and the teaching of that faith. It's silly, but one of the more successful ones that Patty and I did with our kids was celebrating their baptismal anniversary. Because everybody loves a birthday, right?
Mhm.
So
Oh, for sure.
then they get an extra birthday.
Right, yeah.
It's their spiritual birthday. And so we had one of those You Are Special red plates.
Okay.
I don't know if you've ever seen those.
Yeah.
And we got it with a black marker so that you got to sign your name and the date that you used the plate on the back. And so our kids grew up, and that night they got to choose whatever they wanted for dinner.
Okay.
And it was, we had a little gift for them, and it was a time for us to tell them, this is, you're a baby, but this is what happened at your baptism. Your grandma and grandpa were there, your both sets were there, and your sponsor is my college roommate, Susie. It was Patty's roommate, Susie.
Mhm.
And so, Meredith and Caitlin and Peter grew up. Peter's godparents were just here and spent some time with us and with him a few weeks ago. Rod is he was a lawyer. He's still a lawyer. He's a judge now, district court judge in the state of Minnesota. But he still, they would write a card every baptismal anniversary to Peter, and then Rod would put in a $1 bill for every year. So Peter looked forward to that, like, I get $8 this year. And yeah. So, and Rod has continued to be a dear, close friend. A little crazy. He's a judge, and then he referees basketball. I said, you pick out the 2 most dangerous jobs in the world right now. But anyhow, the little marks or moments that you can mark time-wise with the kids, I think, are, I mean, even, you could even pull out the Catholic Book of Saints, and today's St. Paul Sunday, so we're going to have a Roman meal, because, he was a Roman Jew, so, I mean, just silly stuff, but, figure out ways that, Charlotte did an amazing job filling food bags that feed my starving children, so we're going to have a little celebration of Charlotte for the work that she did.
Right.
Those kinds of things.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
And the family on mission really becomes the opportunity to build the relationships. And, I think the mistake that I made, one of them, I made many, but was that the church became the mission, and that shouldn't have been the mission. Thankfully, we've weathered that enough that, the girls are still connected and, very faith-filled. And Pete's, he's part of the way there. So, grateful for who he is, because, he is responsible, hardworking. So he's got all the stuff, right? So God will help him make the connections. Yeah.
Well, I remember even with us, like we said, we always went to church, but we might have been going through the motions more.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we turned 40, I don't know, something just changed, and we wanted more, and that's when we actually started going to Lutheran church in St. Louis, and kind of doing more, being more involved. So maybe when he turns 40,
Yeah.
something will hit him. And I can't explain it. It was just something like, I know I needed more. It was just going through the motions.
Mm-hmm.
Too, so that worked out.
So, Delaney, can we have the questions up on the board? So how would it affect you to have a spiritual mentor? I think, was that last week's? That was last week's, I bet. Sorry, that's the wrong, I gave you the wrong ones. The question is, how does Jesus' definition of family compare to your patterns of family life? How does Jesus' definition, whoever does the will of my Father is my brother, my sister, my mother, how does that interact with your family life?
I would think mine is pretty much different, because Jesus, extended him to everybody as his family. So people that believed in him or wanted to hear him, they became part of his family. So I think I have to work on that and try to be more open to people and trying to get closer with them. So, as far as the immediate family, like Jeff said, we have that down, but I would say I have work to do on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. It's more the non-family to make them part of the family.
Yeah.
Too. So.
A lot of times I think people don't realize that they are your family too, that we all should be one.
Yeah.
And be there for everybody, and instead of, fighting, and that's where we're going in this world today. It's just getting ugly.
Yeah.
I feel. But
Yeah. I agree. Another example of extended family that I've shared before, so you may have heard some of this, but my dad was an eye doctor when he moved into this small town to start his practice there. he was befriended by a dentist who had a big medical complex, and he was only using half of it. So he offered to my dad rent-free, I think, basically the first year, and also helped him, gave him the use of his front office staff to help Dad with scheduling and so eventually, like within a year or two, then my dad hired an office person, Pearl Reese. She went to our church. Her husband was a banker, and he had a massive heart attack at age 40 and died. So they had a son who was 11, Howard, Skip, they called him. And so Dad and a couple of other guys from the church kind of took over being dad for Skip. So they were with him for the father-son banquet. Chip Bach would take him because my dad was taking my brother. They didn't have it when I was growing up, but my older brother got to do that. But even like for graduations and confirmations, you know, these guys represented Skip as a dad. And there was, I think, my dad had some good connections with the college that I went to the same college my dad went to that actually my grandmother had gone to in Sioux Falls, Augustana College. And so Skip, I think my dad helped to arrange a scholarship for him so that he could afford to go. I wouldn't put it past my dad if my dad actually paid for it. My dad was kind of like that. And so Skip would come home from college every break, and he had this VW Bug, and I was probably like 10 years old, 12 years old. No, I've been younger than that, because he was 10 years older than me. So 8 or 9, 10 years old when he was coming home from college, and he'd take us to the Chick-Talk Drive-In. That was the actual drive-in name. And we'd get slushies, and he'd talk about what was going on in our lives, and really befriended us. And he became an important part of our family. I think my dad and these other guys had become an important part of his family, and then he wanted to become a part of our family. And so like my dad's funeral, Skip had a big role there. I mean, all these people in his life, you know, that he's kind of passed on and passed that on to us. We just had friends that know Skip and Judy visiting us in early March, and so Patty said, well, let's give him a call. So we called him, and you know, I hadn't talked to him for a couple of years. It had been a while, but you know, still get the cards, you know, the Christmas cards, the birthday cards, that kind of stuff. But those relationships that you invest in pay back. And so don't worry about not being as strong outside of the family, because I believe that God will put people of peace in your life that you can be connected to, and by blessing them, I think they'll bless your family. So the second question is, what would change if your family were to explicitly identify a mission greater than just being a family?
Well, like you were saying earlier, I think to have a mission, whatever it is, kind of things just happen, you know, then from there, you know, you're teaching the other person and, you know, just doing stuff. And, you know, I think it's good to have a thing, right?
Yeah.
You know, to gravitate
Yeah. And so maybe the next step is for the two of you to pray about what that family mission might be. And I think when we identify it and begin to own it, then that just becomes, a part of who you are as a family. Kind of like my grandparents were farmers, and that we all chipped in and helped because that's what family does. I was going to begin, and I forgot, because we had a challenge. The challenge was, what were some of the ways that God was getting your attention? We talked about the Kairos circle 2 weeks ago, it would have been. So did you have a chance to think through any challenges that God was trying to get your attention about? And I think, we talked about maybe finding a specific time. Did you find a time like morning or breakfast or after lunch or bedtime? We also talked about taking notes. When one of those Kairos moments happens, to journal about it. Any response to that challenge?
I didn't have anything hit me, and I did the silence in the morning thing, but it waned pretty fast.
It's hard, isn't it?
Yeah, especially in the morning. You're like, I got to put the coffee on and go here. So I need to go back at it.
Okay.
And one thing that was interesting, the little time I did it, 5 minutes is a long time. Longer than you think. It just thinks like, wow, 5 minutes. But when you're sitting there, 5 minutes is a long time.
It is. Yeah. And I'm real scattered, so it's especially hard for me to keep focused. That's why, for me, the scripture, "Be still, know that I am God," from Psalm 46 is helpful, because then when I feel myself kind of going off, spinning into Alice in Wonderland, then I can try to draw me back to that center.
Yeah, I struggle sleeping at night for that reason. I just start thinking of things, and they're usually stupid too. So
Yeah.
not anything meaningful either. But
Anything else? All right. So who is your family? That's the question that we'll be looking at the next few weeks here. Why don't we close with a word of prayer, and then we'll say au revoir to our online community. Gracious God, we thank you for this night and for this time together. You are the center of our family, Lord, and we often forget that. So continue to draw us back to you and help us to see the people that you are putting in our lives, people of peace, that are open to us, that are open to you, that are searching for meaning and hope and peace in their lives. We pray, Lord, that you would lead us and guide us and give us your wisdom as we seek to draw our family together, but not just our family, but our spiritual family, those whom you are connecting to us. Thank you for our children and our grandchildren. Thank you for our extended families. Help us to be aware also of our spiritual family. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.